My friend's older sister followed me to the door, and in that silence, everything changed. I had walked into my friend's house more times than I could count. The front door still made the same hollow sound when it closed. The living room still smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Even the light spilling through the curtains felt unchanged. It was a place I thought I understood. A place that had never asked me to feel anything complicated. Until that evening. She was standing near the staircase when I arrived. My friend's older sister. She wasn't doing anything special. She was just holding her phone in one hand, her hair resting naturally against her shoulders. Her posture relaxed in a way that only comes from someone who has learned to be comfortable with herself. But something about her felt different to me now. Not louder, not brighter, just clearer. She looked up when she heard the door. Our eyes met for a second longer than politeness required. "Hey," she said softly, like she didn't want to disturb the calm of the house. Her voice had always been warm, but this time I noticed the way it carried patience, the way it didn't rush. I smiled back, a little slower than usual. "Hey." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and suddenly the space between us felt smaller than it ever had before. She moved aside to let me pass, and as I walked by, our shoulders brushed. It was barely a touch, the kind people would never mention, but I felt it. Not because it was physical, but because it was unexpected, because it made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself it meant nothing, but my body didn't believe me. She walked ahead of me toward the living room, and I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The calm rhythm of her steps, the quiet confidence in her posture, the way she carried herself like someone who had lived, learned, and softened without breaking. I wondered when she had stopped being my friend's sister and started becoming her. We talked casually at first, about small things, about work, about how long it had been since we last saw each other. But every word felt slower, more deliberate, like we were both aware there was something under the surface we weren't ready to touch. She smiled at something I said. Not a polite smile, a real one, the kind that lingers. And for a moment, I forgot every rule I had ever taught myself about where my feelings were allowed to go. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume when she leaned slightly closer. I noticed how her eyes softened when she listened. I noticed how her presence made the room feel quieter, warmer, heavier in the best way. And somewhere between the familiar walls and the familiar furniture, I realized something unsettling. Nothing in this house had changed, except the way I was beginning to see her. And that realization didn't feel dangerous. It felt inevitable. We ended up in the kitchen without planning it. Everyone else was in the living room, their voices blending into a soft background hum. Laughter, a television playing, the comfort of familiar noise. But in the kitchen it was quieter. The lights were softer. The world felt smaller. She reached for a cup from the shelf and turned slightly toward me. "Do you want something to drink?" Her question was simple, but the way she asked it felt gentle. Considerate. "Yeah, sure," I said. "Whatever you're having." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that suggests trust, not flirtation. Yet it stayed with me longer than it should have. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed. Again, it was nothing dramatic. But this time, neither of us pulled away immediately. Our hands separated slowly, like we both noticed the same thing at the same moment and didn't know what to do with it. "So," she said, leaning lightly against the counter, "how have you really been?" Not the polite version of the question, the honest one. I hesitated, surprised by how much I wanted to answer truthfully. "I think I'm still figuring things out," I said. "I know where I'm supposed to be going. I just don't always feel like I'm there yet." She nodded slowly, her eyes staying on mine. "That doesn't sound like failure. That sounds like awareness." Her words didn't feel rehearsed. They felt lived in. I laughed quietly. "You always make things sound calmer than they are." "That's because panic doesn't change anything," she said softly. "Understanding does." There was a pause after that. Not awkward, just full. I noticed the way she held her cup with both hands, the way her shoulders relaxed when she spoke, the way her gaze didn't rush away when I looked back at her. I asked about her life, She didn't give me a perfect answer. She talked about choices she wasn't sure about anymore, about dreams that had shifted shape, about learning to be strong without becoming closed. I thought confidence meant never doubting yourself, she admitted quietly. But I think it really means allowing yourself to question without falling apart. I saw something vulnerable in her then. Not weakness, depth. And I realized she wasn't just someone I admired. She was someone I understood. She smiled at me again, smaller this time, softer, and said, "You listen differently than most people." I swallowed. "You talk like you want to be heard." Another pause. The air between us felt warmer, closer. She stepped just a little nearer while reaching for the sugar jar, and her arm brushed against mine. This time she didn't move away. Neither did I. Our conversation slowed, like we were both afraid of breaking something fragile. I felt the strange pull of wanting to stay in that moment longer than necessary, wanting to keep her attention, wanting to be seen by her the way she was seeing me. And for the first time, I wondered if she felt it too. Because when our eyes met again, there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not certainty, but possibility. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by ordinary objects and gentle light, I realized something unsettling and beautiful. This wasn't just a conversation. It was the beginning of something neither of us had named, but both of us could feel. I noticed her watching me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't bold. It was quiet, the kind of look that lives in the space between thoughts. I only caught it because I turned too quickly, and suddenly there she was, already looking at me. She didn't look away immediately. Neither did I. For a moment, the rest of the room faded into something distant and unimportant. The soft voices from the living room, the clink of cups, the familiar background sounds. All of it felt far away. What remained was her gaze. Steady, gentle, honest. Then she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave everyone. The smaller one. The real one. I felt something shift in my chest. A slow, quiet movement, like a door opening without making a sound. She looked down for a second, as if she had revealed more than she intended. When she looked back up, her eyes were softer. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked lightly. "No," I replied quickly. "You just surprised me." She tilted her head slightly, curious. "In a good way?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, in a good way." Her smile deepened just a little. We stood there in that strange, suspended moment where nothing had officially happened. Yet everything had changed. She reached out to gesture toward the hallway while making a small joke, and as she did, her fingers brushed my arm. This time it wasn't accidental. It was brief, gentle, almost careful. But she left her hand there for just a second longer than necessary. I felt warmth spread under my skin, not from the touch itself, but from what it implied: awareness, connection, possibility. She seemed to realize it too, because her hand slowly withdrew, and she tucked it back against herself like she was protecting something delicate. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what words were allowed yet, so I stayed quiet. We moved closer to the doorway of the kitchen, standing side by side now instead of across from each other. Our shoulders didn't touch, but the space between us felt charged, like the air itself was listening. "I used to think confidence meant knowing exactly who you are," she said softly. "Now I think it means being okay with not having everything figured out." I glanced at her. "Then I guess we're both doing better than we think." She laughed quietly at that. Not loudly, not carelessly, just enough to show she felt understood. She looked at me again. And this time, she didn't hide it. There was curiosity in her eyes. Not about who I was, but about who I could be. And in that look, I felt something rare, being seen without being judged. My heart beat slower, deeper. I realized then that attraction doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives gently, wearing the face of understanding. And when she touched my arm again, just for a moment, I knew the look we had shared wasn't accidental anymore. It was intentional. It was quiet. It was changing everything. We didn't plan to talk about anything serious. It just happened. We had moved to the edge of the living room, sitting a little apart from everyone else, close enough to hear the laughter but far enough to feel like we were in our own quiet pocket of space. The lights were dimmer here. The room felt softer, safer. She folded one leg beneath her, resting her hands loosely in her lap. I noticed the way her shoulders lowered, like she was finally allowing herself to breathe. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. Her voice wasn't heavy, but it was careful. "Yeah," I said. "Of course." She looked down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "Sometimes I feel like people only see the version of me I've already outgrown." The words landed gently, but they carried weight. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to comfort her. I just stayed there, fully present, letting her feel heard. "I've learned how to be strong," she continued quietly. "How to be confident. How to keep things together. But some days, I wish someone would notice that I still get tired." Her honesty felt like a gift. Not dramatic, not broken, just real. I leaned forward slightly without realizing it, my voice softer when I spoke. "I think the strongest people are usually the ones who get tired the most." She smiled at that, but her eyes shimmered with something deeper. "Thank you," she whispered. Our knees brushed as she shifted closer. Neither of us moved away. The contact felt natural now. Familiar. Welcome. I shared something too, about how I often felt like I was walking between who I was and who I was expected to become. About the pressure to move forward without ever looking uncertain. She listened the way only someone who understands vulnerability can. Not with pity, with recognition. "You don't pretend," she said quietly. "That's rare." I felt my chest tighten, not with pain, but with something gentler, like being accepted without explanation. She reached out without thinking and placed her hand lightly over mine. The touch was soft, steady, warm. Not a declaration, a reassurance. I didn't pull away. I let my fingers rest under hers, feeling the small human reality of her presence. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room seemed to breathe with us. Her thumb moved just slightly, almost unconsciously, against the side of my hand. Not a gesture of romance, but of comfort, of connection. She noticed it and paused, then slowly lifted her hand away, but not before our eyes met again. This time, there was no confusion in her expression, only understanding, and something quietly unspoken. I realized then that attraction wasn't the strongest thing between us. It was trust. It was the way we allowed each other to be unfinished. She exhaled softly. "I didn't expect to feel this understood tonight." I smiled faintly. "I didn't expect to understand someone this easily." Another gentle pause. Not empty, full. I knew then that whatever this was between us, it wasn't built on curiosity alone. It was built on recognition, and that made it far more dangerous, and far more beautiful. I didn't realize how late it had gotten until my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, then back at her. "I should probably head out." The words felt practical, but they didn't feel honest. She nodded slowly, even though something in her eyes suggested she wasn't ready for the moment to end either. "Yeah, of course." We stood at the same time, almost in sync, like our bodies had already learned each other's rhythm. She walked beside me through the hallway, her steps unhurried, her presence close without being intrusive. The house felt quieter now. The laughter from earlier had softened into distant murmurs. The lights cast longer shadows along the walls. The familiar space seemed to hold its breath with us. When we reached the door, she stopped just a step behind me. I turned. She was closer than I expected. Close enough to notice the faint lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled. Close enough to feel the warmth of her presence without touching her. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged, like a question waiting to be answered. She rested her hand against the doorframe, fingers curling lightly around the edge. Her posture wasn't guarded. It was thoughtful, almost hesitant. I could hear my own heartbeat. She looked at me, really looked at me, not like someone saying goodbye, but like someone trying to understand what this moment meant. You always leave so quietly, she said softly. I gave a small smile. I don't like making goodbyes heavier than they have to be. Her eyes searched mine. You never look back. The words weren't an accusation. They were an observation. And then she added, barely above a whisper, I wonder if you ever regret that. The sentence stayed between us, fragile and honest. I swallowed. I think I'm afraid that if I look back, I'll want to stay. I admitted. Her breath caught just slightly. She stepped closer. Not enough to touch me, but enough that the space between us no longer felt empty. I don't think wanting to stay is a weakness, she said. I think it means something mattered. I felt her hand brush lightly against mine, just the tips of her fingers. A gentle, grounding touch. Not a demand. An invitation to feel. I looked down at our hands for a moment, then back at her face. You make it hard not to look back. She smiled, slowly, tenderly, like she was trying not to let that smile reveal too much. You make it hard not to hope, she replied. The air between us felt warm now. Close. Alive. We didn't move any closer. We didn't need to. Her eyes softened, and I noticed the quiet vulnerability there. Not uncertainty, but honesty. I realized then that this moment wasn't about crossing a line. It was about standing right at the edge of one, and respecting it. I reached out slowly and placed my hand gently over hers. Just enough to feel her warmth. Just enough to say I understood. She didn't pull away. She didn't lean in. She simply stayed. And in that stillness, I felt something powerful settle between us. Not urgency, not temptation, but recognition. I opened the door. Cool night air brushed against my face. Before I stepped outside, I looked at her again. This time, I didn't turn away too quickly. I didn't leave right away. The door was open. The night air was waiting. But I stayed where I was, half inside the house, half standing in a moment that felt too important to rush. She noticed. Of course she did. You don't have to go yet, she said softly. Not as a request, not as a plea, just as an honest thought spoken out loud. I turned back fully toward her. The hallway light traced the gentle lines of her face, the quiet strength in her posture, the vulnerability she wasn't trying to hide anymore. I'm not sure I'm ready to, I admitted. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had been holding the same thought inside herself. We stood closer now, not touching, but no longer pretending there wasn't something between us. She folded her arms loosely, then slowly let them fall back to her sides. I keep telling myself this is just timing, she said. Just circumstances. Just names we give things so we don't have to feel them too deeply. I listened, fully. And what do you actually feel? I asked gently. She looked at me for a long second before answering. I feel like I see you, and I feel like you see me, and I don't want to pretend that doesn't matter. Her honesty didn't feel dramatic. Felt brave. I nodded slowly. I've been trying to convince myself this is just curiosity, but it doesn't feel like that anymore. Her eyes softened. No, she whispered. It doesn't. I reached out without thinking and rested my hand lightly against her forearm. The contact was careful, respectful, real. She looked down at my hand, then back up at me. Instead of pulling away, she placed her other hand gently over mine, grounding me, steadying both of us. Our foreheads didn't touch. Our bodies didn't lean closer, but our presence did. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said quietly. Neither do I replied. And I don't want to lose what this is by rushing it, she added. I felt something warm settle in my chest. Then let's not rush. She smiled. A soft, relieved smile, like someone who had been holding her breath. We stayed like that for a moment, hands resting together, the world quiet around us. I realized then that love doesn't always begin with passion. Sometimes it begins with restraint, with care, with the decision to protect something before it even fully exists. I don't know where this goes, she said. I met her eyes. I just know it's real. She exhaled slowly, as if that was all she needed to hear. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a gentle hug. Not tight, not urgent, just close enough to feel each other's presence, just long enough to feel safe. I rested my hands lightly against her back, feeling her breathe, feeling her stay. No rush, no pressure, only connection. When she pulled back, her hands lingered briefly at my sides. "Thank you for being honest with me," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me with it," I replied. We held each other's gaze again, not with longing now, but with understanding. And in that moment, I knew, whatever happened next, it would be built on truth. I stepped outside into the night, the cool air brushing against my skin, and for a moment, I thought I might finally breathe freely. But the moment my feet left the threshold, I realized I wasn't breathing for myself anymore. I was still holding on to her presence, still feeling the warmth of her hand against mine lingering in my memory. She stood at the doorway, framed by the soft hallway light behind her, watching me. Not impatiently, not expectantly, just watching. And in that gaze, there was something more than curiosity or concern. There was understanding. There was recognition. There was a quiet invitation to see what might come next. I paused. For the first time, I allowed myself to look back. Slowly, deliberately, my eyes met hers again. She smiled softly, not the full, confident smile from before, but something quieter, deeper. The kind that carries secrets and hopes all at once. And in that smile, I saw everything unspoken between us. The longing, the hesitation, the fear, and the trust we had quietly built. "You really are going to look back?" she teased lightly, though her voice carried a tremor that betrayed her own emotions. I smiled, a little sheepishly. "I think some doors aren't meant to be closed completely, not when there's something worth seeing on the other side." She laughed softly, the sound that had been echoing in my thoughts since the moment I first noticed her that evening. It was warm, familiar, yet tinged with something new. She stepped closer, the cool air doing nothing to hide the warmth I suddenly felt in her proximity. We didn't touch, not yet, but the space between us felt smaller, charged with the promise of what could be. There was no need for words. There was no need for declarations. Just acknowledgement, just presence. "I don't know what comes next," I admitted, my voice quiet. "I don't know if we'll figure it out, or if life will get in the way. But I know that I want to see where this goes if you do too." Her eyes glimmered. "I want that too," she whispered. "But we take it slow. We don't rush. We don't pretend we have it all figured out." I nodded. "Slow is perfect." She smiled, and this time it was full, radiant, a little shy, and entirely honest. Then, without hesitation, she reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was fleeting, gentle, meaningful, the kind that says everything without saying a word. "I guess some doors were never really closed," she said softly. I felt the weight of those words in my chest. They weren't just a metaphor. They were a promise, a beginning, a fragile, unspoken commitment to see what could grow between us, without forcing it. I stepped back reluctantly, giving her space, but our eyes never left each other. I walked down the path, slow enough for her to stay in view, slow enough for the connection we had forged to linger in the night air. And when I finally reached the street, I glanced back one more time. She was still there, framed in the doorway, watching, smiling. And for the first time, I understood that some goodbyes aren't endings. Some beginnings are simply waiting for you to acknowledge them. In that moment, the world felt infinite, and we were both standing at the edge of it, together yet uncertain, but willing to step forward anyway. If this story made your heart skip a beat, or reminded you of a connection you couldn't forget, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, have you ever felt a moment that changed everything, just by standing in the right place at the right time?